All right, this is Rich Bendixson from Dashboard Gear, and I think we're about ready to get started here. I am going to be recording this, and if you do have questions, feel free to use the chat and the QA facilities. And I'm going to cover a variety of topics, and some of those are Dashboard Gear specific, some are general, but if there's anything in particular you have, feel free to ask. My name is Rich Bendixson, and I've been doing reporting in the Infor space, Lawson, for almost 30 years now, so a long time. I am the founder of Dashboard Gear. We have about 200 customers that are using our products and our services to do their reporting on Lawson. We were founded in 2007, and we have a number of what we call connectors. And what that does is it basically creates a data warehouse / data mart out of your Infor data so that you can unlock the full potential of your reporting tools that you're using.
What I'd like to talk about in this is people oftentimes ask us, are you a competitor of Burst or a competitor of Infor, or what do you have from a reporting tool perspective? And the reality is there are hundreds of reporting tools on the market today. I brought up here this chart. This is called the Gartner Magic Quadrant of Business Intelligence Providers. And really what this does is just highlight, I'm not bringing it up to say one's better or worse than the other, but just to show you that there are a number of them out there. We're actually not a reporting and analytics tool per se. We work with all of these different providers. So whether it be, Microsoft you see on there, or Tableau, or Burst, or Business Objects, and Cognos, MicroStrategy, there are literally hundreds of them out there. And we work with all of them that are currently on the market. Matter of fact, I surveyed our customer base a while back on what they were using, and this was the makeup of that customer base. A good chunk of them are Crystal. As you can see, what is that, about 20 or 40% or so are Crystal. Another chunk are SSRS, Power BI, Excel. We got Tableau in there. We got some Burst. And these are constantly kind of changing. So, for instance, 2 years ago on this slide, the way it was Crystal was probably 50%, if not more. And if I would have went further back, Crystal would have been even more. Tableau would have been hardly anything. Burst wouldn't have been on here at all. So these are constantly kind of shifting targets, but currently this is kind of the makeup. And from our standpoint, it doesn't matter to us what you use from a reporting tool. What our job is at Dashboard Gear is to unlock the data so that you can best take advantage of what these different tools have to offer. And so just like when someone asks me what the best tool is to use from a pure reporting and analytics perspective, I would say it's going to depend on what it is that you're trying to do, because each of these tools does some things very well and does some things not so good. So what we do is try and match that up, much like if, I used a construction analogy one other time where if you were needing a saw, sometimes you want to use a jigsaw, sometimes you want to use a circular saw, sometimes a handsaw. It's just going to depend on what you're trying to do, because each of these tools does things a little different. Now, they all like to tell you they do everything, but the reality is they all do good and bad at something or another. So just keep that in mind. So if you're going to try and corner me on what the best tool is to use, I'm going to avoid that like the plague, because there really isn't a right answer in that regard. All right. What does the Dashboard Gear product do? I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to get into some kind of best practices and some other things that are out there. So what Dashboard Gear does is we read your source data, and in this case, in the market that we're at from a package perspective is Infor and Kronos. We can also do some custom data, but that's really kind of a custom offering. So we read your source data, we put that into what we call a data mart, and then we also build what are called OLAP cubes on top of it. Now, many organizations we work with have what's called a data warehouse. We have some of those in play and so forth. And really, there's a difference in what we do than a pure data warehouse. A data warehouse is a gathering of a bunch of data that then can be consumed by different groups and organizations. A data mart is more purpose-built, typically around a department for their particular needs. And in our case, what I'm talking about today, the Infor and the Kronos space, those particular markets. Now, a lot of our customers use our data pumps to pump not only their departmental data mart, meaning their financial or the HR or supply chain data, but also send it to an enterprise warehouse as well. So we generate both of those data sets. So that's one of the things how a data mart differentiates from like a data warehouse that's in there. Now, there's a new thing that's some of you may have come across. In the Infor space, lately there's been a lot of talk. Many of you are moving to the cloud as far as, moving to the cloud offering that's there. And I'll get into what that means here in a little bit. And as part of that, there's another piece of technology that's in there called the data lake. A data lake differentiates even further from a data warehouse and a data mart and so forth. It too is a storage area of data, but it has a different fundamental use as well. And actually, a lot of people don't know that, but the person who created the term data lake was actually an ex-Lawson employee from the founder of the Smart Notifications product that year. Some of you may have from the old LBI days. James Dixon is his name. He's since left and started a company called Pentaho Analytics, but he's the one who coined the term data lake. And really what a data lake is it changes the onus of putting meaning to the data in who puts it there. So for instance, in a data lake, people that take something from Infor to put it in a data lake, the Infor applications themselves don't care how you're using that data in the data lake. Their goal is just to throw it out there. A data warehouse, the person putting it in the warehouse wants to figure out what the data is, and they grab specific things out of the source system and put it into the data warehouse. And a data mart is much the same. So basically, a data lake puts the onus on the person pulling the data out of the data lake on how to know how to use it. A data warehouse puts the onus on the data warehouse person to figure out how to put it in so that the people taking it out can understand it better. And that's what a data mart is as well. So if any of you have had questions, the difference between a data lake and a data warehouse, it really is just a matter of a data lake is just throwing the data out there, and it's just a big glob of data. And then whoever's using it has to figure out how to make use of that. So that's the only thing technically different between that. A lot of software vendors like Infor or Microsoft or Amazon or Google like the concept of a data lake because they have so many applications. So the HCM application, for instance, on Infor, the financial application on Infor, the application developers in each of those areas don't have to figure out how it's going to be used from a reporting. Their whole goal is I'm just going to get it out to the data lake, and they don't have to know. And then whoever's going to use that can figure out how to put it together. So that's one of the reasons why they're becoming popular with software providers. From a report or a consumer of that, at the end of the day, if you were going to use the data lake, you're going to have to take it from the data lake and put some meaning into it as well. So what we do at Dashboard Gear is we have what are called connectors to the data. And those connectors will connect to either on-premise databases, they'll connect to the cloud for data lakes, or in the case of Infor's Cloud Suite application, they have a concept called a replication set. So we connect to those APIs. We take that data and then we transform it into reportable formats called a data mart in the cubes. And so that's kind of the concept that we're doing. So if you're ever confused on what any of that is, hopefully that helps clear that up. Now, our solutions that we have for each of those areas are around HR, payroll benefits. We have the full HCM suite. We cover everything from the S3 to the GHR. We have the financials from both the Cloud Suite as well as the S3, and supply chain, same thing, Cloud Suite as well as the S3. And then we can also do custom. Now, what we do in each of those areas is we have been doing this for many years, as you saw. We went around and found out where are people struggling in each of those areas so that we can take the data from the source system, transform it into much more consumable pieces. And how we do that, like I said, is we use our connectors, and the connectors are both, either data direct if you're on premise, like many of you are that are existing customers, and then a lot of our newer customers are in the cloud, so we're using replication sets, database export, and some of those techniques to get at it. So we grab the data that way. Once you get it to the data marts, then you can use whatever tools you want that can connect to SQL Server. So because we're putting it into generic SQL Server data sets and Cube data sets, you then use a variety of tools to do that. Now, I always struggle with which tools to bring up and show people when we get into the demos, because you're all doing different things. And like I said, we really don't care from that perspective. So I just chose two today. One, because they're both on my laptop, so it makes it easy for me to kind of control the environment. But I could just as easily have showed you in Burst from that perspective. That uses the internet, so I always get a little bit nervous on that because it's a cloud connection. And then there's one from Microsoft called Power BI, same thing. That's a cloud connection as well. Maybe what I'll do is I'll log in during this and at least show you what that looks like. But technically, it's from our perspective, we can do either one. Now, what I like to do is I like to start by showing Excel, talking about that, just because most of you can relate to that. Now, when I had surveyed people, I went back, there's probably about, I'll say a good third of you that are using Excel as your only reporting option. And then almost all of you, I'm willing to say probably all of you, use it at some way, shape, or form. So it makes it for a good thing for me to demonstrate to you that way. Now, what we do in our data marts for that is, because we're putting the data both in generic SQL as well as in Cube technology, Excel has built right into it the ability to connect to those cubes. Now, we have about 24 or so cubes as part of our Cube library that we deploy as part of our application. And what you do as a cube is like a model on a particular subject area that you can connect to answer specific questions. And so going back to what I said at the beginning and working with various customers, we found the same kind of problems or questions occurring over and over again. Some of them were just pure, how do I do financial reporting? So I'll start with that one. So if I go to the data menu in Excel, one of the things you're going to see built into Excel is the ability to connect to analysis services. Now, what analysis services is the engine that runs cubes inside the SQL Server environment. So if you have a license for SQL Server, you have a license for analysis services. And analysis services is the cube engine. So what we do is we deploy each subject area into that analysis services cube engine. And then when you want to connect to it in Excel, you just say, I want to go to analysis services. I'm going to go to this server. It looks at your Windows account. And when you do that, and if I'd say next, it would give me my list of cubes I can see. Now, I'm not going to go through and do that, because once you do that once on your machine, if I go under existing connections, it actually saves all the existing connections that you connected to. So for instance, if I go to my GL summary cube, which on my laptop here, which I'm going to, and I say, okay, that's going to open up this cube engine here. I'm going to try and make it bigger. It doesn't make that part bigger over there, but it won't change this over here in Excel. What a cube is like a model in that particular area that you can view the data in different ways. And that model has two main parts to it. At the top are what are called the measures. So in the case of General Ledger, what we've done is we've went through and defined a series of measures. Now, as part of our implementation, what we do is we deliver what's called the base implementation, which is you get exactly what I'm going to show you here today right out of the box. It just comes out of the box against your M4. From that point on, as part of your subscription and the implementation, we customize this to include other measures or other dimensions and so forth. So as long as you're tracking the data in the Infor, we'll put that into these cubes. So for instance, if I do actuals and I do, one second here, make sure my Teams isn't running. If I do actuals and I want to see the actual amount, I put that down into the values, you'll see that up above. And so what a cube does is allows you to look at any number that's in that subject area and then slice and dice it or look at it by a combination of what are called dimensions. And in the case of general ledger, for instance, you're going to see things like accounts and account units and companies. When you get to Cloud Suite, for those of you that are on Cloud Suite, you're going to see things like your finance dimension 1 through 10. You might see the the entity. There's account units and accounts there as well. So similar things. The terminology changes a little bit, but it's the same concept. There's some more options on the Cloud Suite as far as alternate roll-ups and so forth. But in the case of S3, data, you can look at it just by the normal things that you're used to. So for instance, if I want to see it by my chart of accounts, I can drag that down. If I want to see fiscal years, I can drag that down to the filters, filter the data. Now, how a cube differs from traditional reporting is it allows me to come from the top of the organization or the most summarized format and then drill down. Versus in a traditional reporting situation, you have all the details and you figure out how do I summarize it up. So really what you're doing in a cube is you're picking a value and then you're slicing it down or slicing it up to get down to the value you want. So for instance, right now I'm looking at 2008. If I wanted to see net income from my master, operating expenses, and so forth. So I can see across all of those items. I also can see across various combinations. So if I put periods on here, and if any of you have seen my presentations know that that's pretty much a standard that I show this view like this. It allows you to navigate through a hierarchy as well as look across these dimensions in different ways. And what I'm using here in Excel is called a pivot table. So those of you that have done pivot tables will feel right at home. It's a standard Excel pivot table at this point. So there's tons of resources and information, and many of you are probably already familiar with it. Usually at implementation time, we can go through about an hour presentation to at least get you started, and you have enough to be, pretty dangerous as far as creating reports and queries and all of that on the data. Now, these views that you're looking at here are read-only views of the data, so they're not necessarily going to update data. So one of the questions I get a lot is how does this relate to like Office add-ins, those kind of things. The difference between this and Office add-ins is these do a much better job at querying data or getting data out, but they don't have the ability to upload. So anytime you need to do uploads, whether it be time cards or journal entries or whatever that way, if you're doing uploads, the add-ins tools is what you would use. But if you're just doing general queries and so forth, this is a very powerful tool. It gets it right in Excel. You can do whatever you want. Now, the beauty of these two is once you create one of these queries, so right now I'm looking at, this, and maybe I'll take off my assets and liabilities, so that way I can honestly say it's probably just a P&L. So here's my Excel-based P&L. Go down a couple levels or something, go into that. So it's my Excel-based P&L for 2008. What I can do is I can save this spreadsheet as a normal spreadsheet, but every time I open it up, it's already connected to the cube as well. So I can just go to the data menu and say, I want to refresh and get new data, or maybe it's 2009 now. I'll go to 2009 and can get the information. So it's not only a spreadsheet that you can save, you could send it to other people as well. They can see the data. The difference is if you send this to someone that doesn't have access to the cube, it'll look just like a regular spreadsheet to them. They try and go up and refresh or something like that, it'll force them to try and log in or say they don't have access to the data. If they do have access, they too can refresh and change that. So it makes for a way that you can have dynamic queries right in Excel on the data. Now, one of the questions I get a lot on these is, what if I want to join other data in and so forth? And that's kind of one of the limitations of a cube, in that in a base, and it's not really a cube limitation, it's more of in the Excel pivot table limitation. In an Excel pivot table, you can connect to one cube. So what we need to do is put into that cube whatever it is that you want to put together. So what we try to do to keep things simple for people is put as little as possible into the cubes, but as much as possible at the same time. So it's a balancing act, because the more we put in, the harder it is to work with the cube, because you have to understand more. So for instance, in this general ledger summary cube, which is our most popular one in the financial area, we try to keep this pretty generic, and that it is financial data by period, by account unit. It's typically the things like what you would do an RW100 for in that perspective. So anytime you want to do kind of a query at the period level financials, this cube is the answer there. Now, where we do kind of blur the edges a little bit is when we go over to the supply chain and the AP side, because in those cases, a lot of times you want to see maybe what's invoiced and what's on a PO, or in the PO side, you want to see what was invoiced. So we do blur the lines there and tend to put more of the AP and the PO items together to do that. How you would navigate in there is much the same way. What changes in each cube is just these list of dimensions. So for instance, if I go back here to a new sheet, and I'll go to a new cube. I'm going to go to HR cube. If I go to the employee census cube in HR, we've got a number of different cubes, as I mentioned, in each area. But what the employee census does is get out head count and turnover and that kind of thing, your employee census data. And the measures in that tend to be count data. So for instance, over here on the right-hand side, you can see it says based on effective date and based on enter date. These are the measures, and you can tell they're a measure by this little sum sign. Remember what I said, a measure was the numbers that you're looking at. If I'm looking at the active count that I want to see, I can drag that down to the values, and it will show me the total active count over to the left. Now, because I'm saying looking at based on effective date, this active count doesn't mean a whole lot until I tell it what period of time am I looking at. So in the HR world, what you have to do is you have to give it an effective date. And I've got that in a dimension called HR periods. So if I go down through my periods list and I put HR periods on here, I can say, what is the active count for, maybe I'll say 2010 July, 156. Once you have that, then you can look at the data by any combination of these dimensions. So for instance, if I wanted to see that by age, gender, ethnicity, job code, whatever, I can just drag those dimensions onto the list. So what we've solved in this cube and on the HR side is a lot of the questions came around whether or not there was historical data. How do I get at past data? So in this case, I'm looking at my historical data for July 2010. So this is my active count by age and gender back in time. And how we do that is we gather all the personnel action history, the HR history, the PR rate history. In the case of GHR, what we're doing is we're grabbing all that audit log data and crunching that out and putting that into different files, so that you can look at the data and analyze that over time. So what this allows you to do is get at headcount trends, termination trends, and some of those things over time. So that is the use of that. This is a very powerful cube because that was one that people struggled with, because not so much of the way Infor specifically does it, because most of the ERP and HR vendors we work with have done it, in that they tend to be very transaction-based. So they'll log that a transaction happened on July 7th, but that doesn't give you any relativity to it to know what did it come from and what was that effective date range within it. So what we do in our module is try to build in as much of that logic as possible so that you can generate things point in time or as of and some of those kind of things. So a question came in around, is there a cube for inventory values? Like an IC233? And the answer to that is yes, we do have an IC trans cube. So it's based on the IC transactions. And so based on date ranges and so forth that you can put in there, you can see the ins and the outs and so forth based on that. And we can do some of the mobile supply chain stuff as part of that because a lot of that data does go into the standard tables as well, and we can link in some of those. But there is a cube for the IC side, and so Mary, I see that was there, and I can talk to you about options on that as well. We have cubes so I'll just rattle off a few of the cubes that we've got. There's a PO cube. There's two different AP cubes, one around AP distributions and one around AP invoice data. And the main difference there is the distributions tend to look at it more from an accounting perspective. If you're familiar with the tables in Lawson, it takes AP distrib and breaks that out. And then the AP summary cube looks at it from an invoice and check perspective. There's a requisition cube that looks like it at RQ. In the case of HR, we've got an HR employee census cube. We've got payroll cubes for payroll check and payroll distribution data. We have a benefits cube. We've got a recruiting cube if you're using the recruiting module. There's a LP cube if you're using the absence management. On the finance side, we also have activities management. We have a GL transaction cube that looks at the transaction level. So the cubes cover pretty much all the different modules that you would have there, and we're always looking at different things to add to that based on demand as well. So whatever people are using, we tend to kind of expand on that. I came back to this GL item because I wanted to show you one more thing that, and this is going to get a little more, and this is primarily a little more for my existing customers that have used it a bit. So from your prospects, hopefully this won't confuse you too much, but what I did was I'm going back to the GL cube. Everything I've been showing you to this point in Excel has been using what's called the pivot tables and navigating through pivot tables. What the option within this here, though, is you can also do formulas within the pivot tables. So built into Excel, if I say equals cube, I can create a formula like cube value. There's a formula for cube value that will extract a value from the cube for any combination of cells. So if you don't want to use a pivot table, you can create a free-form spreadsheet using formulas. And this is also the method you use to combine data across cubes because the formulas here, it doesn't matter if they're in a single cube or not. And so what I'm going to do, they take a little bit of typing. So what I did ahead of time was I typed up some formulas. So I'm going to go over to my other monitor here and copy a formula, and I'll paste it in here so that you can see what this looks like. I'm going to put it over here. Expand this out. So you see a great big number here, and up at the top, you see the formula that was used to generate that. And what that number is I said, for this connection of my general ledger summary, which is what this part is, I want to get the fiscal year 2009, and I want to get my current assets member. So what this is giving me is the total current assets for 2009. Didn't filter on company, period, anything like that. I could add additional items to this filter to do that. What I can also do is I can make these formulas dynamic. So for instance, this 2009 was hard-coded, but I could just as easily have come up here and said something like fiscal year and put over here 2009. And now in my formula, I'm going to copy another one I created over here and put that right here. I'm going to paste in that formula. And now you see I have the same number, 6,000. The difference is I referenced a cell. Now what you can do in here is change those cells dynamically, maybe 2008. And if I hit enter, now that went out and got the data for that. So any of you that do want to do more of the advanced reporting, spend some time learning about these cube formulas, and you'll be able to create some pretty cool spreadsheets that can do a lot of things. Because once you do this, you can create whatever formulas you'd like, adding in and referring to members and cubes and so forth from all over. So if you do need to do anything that way, some of older financial reporting doing that, it takes some time to build those. But once you do, they become extremely powerful, and you're not constrained by, kind of this pivot table row and column format. All right, that's pretty much as I wanted to get into on the Excel side. At some point, we might do a webinar going deep into Excel here, and if you are interested in that, let us know. Trying to always figure out what people are interested in, but that is Excel against the cubes. Now, going back here to the PowerPoint, I had mentioned we built out the data marts, we built out the cubes. The cubes, what I showed you in Excel, tend to do a good job at summary data, ad hoc reporting, things like that. What cubes don't do a very good job at is a lot of details, as well as creating kind of polished reports using the traditional report writers like Crystal and SQL reporting services and Cognos and some of those things. In those cases, you'll want to use our SQL Data Mart. So just know that if you're going to use cubes, they have their place. They work great for ad hoc reports, Excel, and so forth. Not so great for detailed reporting. And that is one of the things when I mentioned at the beginning, some of these tools, they do good at some things and bad at others. And the reason for that is some of them are 100% cube-based, and the ones that are 100% cube-based, they tend to fall down on detailed reporting. So if you want to create a labor distribution report or a PO line listing, if it is 100% cube-based report writer, it's really going to fail miserably at the detailed type reporting, because that's just the nature of cubes. They're optimized for summary and analytics and not for details. So just keep that in mind when you're doing it. So if a vendor says we're a cube-based report writer, no, it probably does pretty good analytics, but probably is not so good at detailed report writing. All right. So I'm going to talk about more of our SQL Data Mart now. So one of the things that when we got our start, we got called in a lot to help people with reporting. I mean, we had people that would say, we have 3,000 Crystal reports. Can you help us rewrite these 3,000 Crystal reports? Or can we re-architect it? Or what can we do? And what happens is they were creating the reports on top of the standard Infor data, which technically can be done. And there's a lot of people that are wizards at doing that. So I'm not slamming that, and there's a place for that directly on the production database. The problem with that is a few. One is it does impact performance on your production system, because it is going to be using that production database and going through it that way. The second is the table structures on production are designed to capture data, not to get data out. So what we do on the data marts is flip that so that it's easier to get data out of the system, not so much about getting data in. So to do that, what we're doing is we're pre-joining a lot of the common things, adding indexes to where it needs to go from a reporting perspective, and doing what's called denormalizing and pre-aggregating the data, which just means basically we're taking the data that's in the Infor structures, putting it into structures that are more friendly for people to query and get the data out. And then by doing that, it makes it much easier for you to A, write a report, and then B, the reports run much faster. And so a lot of the reason so many people were creating so many reports previously was because they had to do that to create many flavors of the same report, maybe for certain account units or departments and some of those things. But by flipping the data around, we can help eliminate some of that. And I'm going to give you some different stories here of things that we've done and show you some things that way. So what I'm going to start out with is I'm going to come over to this tool called SQL Reporting Services. It's just a report writer that you could use. You could use Burst or Crystal or anything that you're comfortable with. But I'm going to show this because it's on my laptop here. And if I go into this folder called DBG, I put out here a sample folder. Now, this sample folder is one that we deliver with our HR reports, and it's just our HR samples. And if I go into this report here called a metrics dashboard, what it's going to do is bring up a dashboard looking item. It's a report, but I called it a dashboard that's got some different things that you could do, not necessarily the prettiest thing, but it shows you different chart types you can do and so forth. These reports, you can click on items to drill into them. So once I come in here, I can link one report to another. So this is showing me my head count basically by gender, it's breaking out my headcount and turnover statistics and some of those things. And if I click on an individual number, I can show a detailed report. So this is more, gets down into more of the traditional kind of listing style report that a lot of you do. Now, what I just showed you, I could have done cubes pretty easily on the top. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. I should have went back to my link to go back to my dashboard. I could have done cubes pretty easily on these first one or two reports or dashboards. These could have been built on cubes because they are pretty much summarized data and statistics. This could have been built on our employee census cube, for instance. We are instead building this on a table in SQL Server that we call our employee census table in there. And that basically takes that same data that's in the cube but puts it in a SQL table. And then it optimizes it so that you can do more of the details behind that. And in this particular table, it is a monthly view. So it's got going back in time to where you can see as of any month in time what the values or statistics were using this table. And we use that same concept throughout the whole system as far as when we're building out the reporting. If I go over to this tool, this is called SQL Management Studio. Now this part of the presentation will be a little bit technical in that I'm going to show you behind the scenes the tables that are created that are there, and then we can kind of go from there. So for instance, one of the tables that we create is called GL by period. And if I open up this table in here, and I wish I could make this bigger, unfortunately, it does not allow me to do that, but if I could make this table a little bigger, it shows me the key value for GL reporting data. It shows me a descriptive value, company name, and company full name. What we do to make the reporting process easier is what we call denormalize the data. Normally, when you create a report, you have to know how to join the table that has, you know, the company number in it to the table that has the company description in it. Or if I go to the right here, the account number in it, and then maybe you want to display the account name, so you have to know how to do that. So anyone writing reports has to know, how do I join all of these tables together to do that? What we do wherever possible is we pre-join that data together to minimize that down. So you have the key value and the description. And then usually we create a third column we call the full name, which is a combination of the key value and description. Now this particular table does that for every account and account unit combination for each period and year. So that's why this is GL by period. What this is doing is showing you basically to be able to create a financial report by period, you can just go to this table, and in this table it already has it pre-calculated for the period end balance, the prior year period end balance, the amount, the prior period amount, the prior year to the year to date. We've got all these measures like what you saw in the cube pre-calculated, put in here so that when you go to write a report, you don't have to figure out how do I calculate the year to date amount for cash for 2007. It's already there. Or if you wanted to create a P&L, it's already generated for both the current year, the prior year, the year to date, as well as we put all the budgets in here. So it's got actuals and budgets on one table. So if I'm going into, let's say, Burst to create a report, I just point Burst at our GL by period table, and you use the measures right in there, and away you go. You don't have to go through the process of trying to build out a complex data model or anything that way. It's there. Now, you still can. We're not stopping anything from doing that. We just are trying to streamline the process to where you have to do as little of that as possible. Now, that makes it easier for you to write the report, but it also makes it much easier for you to, from a performance standpoint. So if you're using Burst or Crystal or SQL like I showed you, you don't have to know how to use as many of the tables as possible. You still can. We're not stopping it. But that's the difference between a data mart and pointing it directly at your system. Now, the pain involved, or what's the negative of a data mart, is it has to go through a process to get there. When it's directly in your production system, if you post an entry and you go to create a report, it's there. So it's a live access to that system. In a data mart, it has to go through the process of replicating that data. Now, in the cloud world, in the on-premise world, that used to be a big point. In the cloud world, it's not, because everything is always that way. So, for instance, in using Burst, it has to go through from Infor to the data lake to Burst. It doesn't connect directly. It's not live at that point either. So it's the same, kind of model there. There isn't a live option even at that point. So you don't even really know what you're missing out on there. In the case of our on-premise customers, because that was also an issue, we added another option, and that is we have views that we have direct real-time connection to the production data, and you can choose to turn those on or not. So in our data marts, you can choose to either use our data mart replicated data, which wherever possible, I recommend people use it because A, you're not impacting production, things are pre-calculated and optimized, or you can use our real-time views in those rare cases, and I'm going to say rare because I like to argue with people about when they should use them or not, but in those rare cases when you absolutely do need a real-time report. So for instance, I'd say argue a lot because financial people, I like to have the conversation with them. There's a lot of times people say, I need to have real-time financial reports. Turns out they only run the GL 190 or whatever the posting job is, twice a day. Well, the reality is your data is only going to be updated twice a day. So just run the data mart, refresh those 2 times, and it would be just as real time at that point. So it's not as big a deal, and it really is pretty rare as far as the true real time, unless you're doing a time card edit like in payroll or an inventory type report or trying to do some kind of workflow report through process flow. Those are the cases where real time is, and that's actually those are some of the struggles that people have when they do move to the cloud, because you kind of have to re-architect some of your processes for that as well. All right, so that's a concept. I'm going to pause there and just see if any questions are coming in here. So I got one about how long the data mart refresh takes. That's a common question. It varies by customer, who it's going to be and how much data you have, and it also varies by module. So for instance, on the GL side, many of our customers do that many times, especially at month end, because that process is fairly quick. Some examples, I've got a real small customer. It's a small hospital. I'm not going to give the name, but it's a small hospital. It runs in about 5 minutes on the GL side. I've got another customer here in town, and I think they're on the call from Health Partners. I'll name you. You're on the phone call here. Their financial update during the day when they do it takes about 25 minutes, something like that, when I do a bunch of the items. I have another fairly large health system. Theirs takes about 8 minutes out on the East Coast. So it varies, and the reason it varies so much is it's going to vary on your setup as well. How many levels deep do you have on the account unit structure and on the account? Because of the things we're doing from the aggregation perspective, that's going to impact that, as well as the amount of history you want to do. So for instance, we allow configuration that say I want to do like 4 years of reporting history, or I want to do 10 years, or I want to do 1 year. Whatever you want to do, it's all configurable by module. So that's going to impact it, as well as the number of budgets. And the example I use there, this is the National Hockey League is a customer of ours. They have a budget and a chart of accounts for every team. So whatever that is, as well as the league office. So they run budgets and financials and all of that for 30 plus organizations, as well as multiple currencies. So their process, even though they're fairly small, that sounds complex, they're actually very small, but because they have so much, their process takes quite a while to run. If they didn't have all that based on their volume of data, it actually would probably be about a 5-minute process and be done. So it's a lot of variables in it. That's probably a longer answer than that person wanted. Implementation, what it is and what it includes. So what we have is we have a subscription service, and that includes the software, the implementation, and support for that first year. And what we do is we change it at any time. So you don't need any technical folks at all. What we do is we actually do the installation and configuration. We hook it up to your data. We'll generate all the data items you need out of the cloud system, all of that, connect it up. It replicates the data. anytime you want changes to it, you get a representative assigned to you. That's your customer support rep. You just send them a note. Let's say it's me, and say, Rich, can you add XYZ to our data mart? And I add it for you within a couple days. And I say a couple days. We usually say give us a week, but our average time right now that we're looking at is less than a day to get it out there, actually. So we have a very quick turnaround on average. Some of the items are larger. So for instance, I had one the other day that they didn't have a grants management cube, so we put one of those in. That took me a couple days to get that out there, because that was one that we had to get a lot more information out of them to do a full cube from scratch. It wasn't necessarily just a simple add. So it will vary a little bit. I just did an asset management one for another person that took me a few days. But so it depending on what the initial implementation was and where it's at, we say give us a week, but usually it's faster on that. As far as the install goes, the initial one, it takes us about a week. So by the time we get connected and start going, it's about a week to get going. But because of our model, we say internally we're never done. And that is, anytime you want those changes, we're there for you. So we're constantly implementing and changing and so forth, which is a unique model in the industry, in that everyone gets what they want, basically. And then we have a structure where we try to keep that in sync between it. The other thing I'm going to point out here on these tables is, you'll notice here some of these tables on the left, I have law underscore in front, and the prefix may be different depending on your organization and when we implement it. But basically, we have a facility that you can specify any table in the system that you want to replicate out of the Infor system, and it will replicate it as is. So if you just need a copy of in this case, I've got highlighted AC activity. The AC activity table, it will make a copy of that every time the replication happens. It will replicate that table as is. So not only do you get the tables where we've added in kind of that added value, you get whatever tables you want to replicate. So it's kind of a free form data replication. It becomes your one-stop source for reporting from that standpoint. You can, because it's in SQL Server and it's your database, you can do whatever you want to do to it. We give you some kind of rules that we recommend, but you can add in whatever tables and data and view you want, so it's 100% customizable. So most of our customers have added in other data around it, whether it be Epic clinical data, or some of you school systems that I see on here might be student information systems or point of sales from a retail perspective. If you want to add in any of that other data, it's 100% yours to do that. And if you do need help with that, our consulting services can do that too. We do that all the time. So that's there. So those are some of the things we do. So the table structures are everything from, putting in that data to, well, if I go up to, I'm going to go up to the HR, look to an HR development database of mine here. I'm going to show you one thing. What we do in a lot of them, besides bringing the data together, is we flip the data. And so the change log, for instance, in this table, we'll take any field that history has been done, and we put an old value and a new value, a start date and an end date. So those of you on the HR side know that this is a key problem from a timing perspective. But what we do is we just restore the data in a way that you can get at it. And this then allows you to do point in time. And we do this for GHR as well as the S3 side. Now, by doing that, it allows you to do a bunch of reports and us to do a bunch of reports. And that brings me to one of the things, well, I'm really excited about that we're also announcing that's coming out in May, and that is we have a new org chart tool. So as I mentioned at the beginning, where we get a number of different things and patterns we've seen over and over again, one of those is people being able to see supervisor structures and so forth over time. And so what we're doing is we're coming up with something that actually has solving three problems. The first problem is traditional org charting. I just want to see an org chart, and that can be by your supervisor structure, whether it be in GHR or in the S3 world, as well as over time. So we're going to bring in that historical aspect that we already are familiar with. And then you don't have to also, this isn't just for our Infor and Kronos people. This is going out to the general general market. So there's the general CSV integration options as well. So maybe you do have, let's say Infor Financials and Workday HR. You can integrate that way too. And then we're going to continually add plugins over time. The second thing that this is going to solve is metrics viewing. So in the metrics viewing world, we get often asked requests to see things over time that people can see their metrics across a hierarchy. So not just a dashboard or a listing. They want to navigate what is my turnover and headcount, by supervisor. It gives you a different way of kind of viewing that in a hierarchical structure. And then the third way, and this has been for some of our retail customers, especially have requested this, when someone goes out to visit a store or so forth, they wanted access to like a company directory in an easy to use manner. And this is coming a little bit later, but we're going to be using it as a company directory kind of concept. And that one's primarily going to be focused in on our mobile people. And so that one will be coming a little later. We're going to start with a web version of it and then try to make it more mobile after that. So the top two will be more, I'll say, more fleshed out in the first one, and the second and the third one is a work in process on that. But those are our three goals that we're doing. So I just wanted to share that because I see there are quite a few HR folks on that. So we'll kind of go from there. The question came in, is there an additional charge for that? And the answer to that is yes, there is going to be an additional charge besides just for the HR. So it is an add-on because it doesn't necessarily. The good of it is if you are an existing customer, it plugs right on. So the implementation is a piece of cake. I mean, it just clams right in at that point, but it is a separate tool per se, unfortunately. Let's see. There was other couple questions that came in. There was one about how this differs from IBI and DEPM. So the difference of our data mart between the DEPM and the IBI is those are tools that sit on the front end. Now there are some back end pieces to it, but the back end pieces to the IBI in the DEPM platform is primarily to manage the front end. The IBI and DEPM do for those of you that don't know, DEPM is the budgeting and planning portion of the Infor suite, and IBI is kind of the generic financial reporting aspects where it just does that. Now it can do some other things as well. This is more of a platform of your data that you could use IBI, for instance, on top of ours. So some of the same data is there, but ours is a little broader in that it covers the full data spectrum, and it's designed to do more of the integration maybe with third parties. So for instance, a lot of people use our HR data mart to do integrations to their benefit providers and so forth. So if let's say you're up in the cloud, a cloud suite provider, and you need to create an extract to send to Aetna or something like that, you really can't use IBI and DEPM to extract the data to send to your benefit provider. It's not a data platform that way. Versus ours is, you would source that right from there. So you could just house it right from that. So that's one of the differences between it. So some of our customers do use IBI on top of it. We do have some that use both IBI because Infor does deliver reports in IBI, and we have consultants that implement it. It's a good tool for what it does, but it's a subset of the solution of what that does. All right. Connectors and data models for multi-tenant V11 and payroll. The answer is yep. We have connectors for all across the board from multi-tenant, and in those cases we use a combination of replication sets and what they call DB export. And the reason that we use DB export is because the replication sets still have some limitations to them of what they can export. So for the GHR side, when we want to get at audit log data and some of those things, we have to use DB export to do that. But we use those standard tools within the Infor space. At some point, we may source some of it from the data lake, but that's still being flushed out over on Infor side as far as exposing some of that. So we haven't done anything there, but we'll just plop in a different connector when that happens. Single tenant, no problem. We've been doing that for years, so that works the same way for a single tenant cloud that as well as an on-premise. They basically operate the same. We have, I bet, 50 customers on and the cloud now, single tenant. So that's no problem doing that. All right. See if there's any other questions. One of the questions came up here about pricing. Pricing on this right now is we're a subscription model. It's $25,000 for the first year and $12,000 for subsequent years. And like I said, that's the implementation and everything included in that. So it's a very straightforward implementation and pricing. So specific examples of the hierarchical metrics, so the question was, what are some specific examples of the hierarchical metrics with respect to the May 2020 release version? So the for both S3 and GHR, yep, it covers both of those. The standard ones, we're trying to do it to where it's generic. You can do any calculation we have in our data mart. The ones we've been really focusing on are things around headcount, turnover. We have some promotional counts. We have a transfer count in there. Our beta customer that we're going to be working with on that has what movement has been a big deal, where they basically wanted to see the beginning value for a month, all the transfers in, hires and terminations, and then the ending value. So it tends to be around the headcount, but technically we should be able to incorporate any numerical value that's in there, because it's just a generically link out to our standard data mart at that point. And then we also do have a pure CSV load where you can load any column and value you want. So as long as you can calculate it and get it to a CSV, actually it could go in there as a metric. All right. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, and I know we've got to the end. I spoke for a long time here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to, see my slide here, my slide deck. There's my my contact, as well as Tom, who's in our sales group. So we'll kind of go through each of those items, and if you have questions, call or email anytime, and we can do a custom demo or discussion if you have any questions that way too. If you have any suggestions for a future webinar, let us know. We're constantly looking for new ideas on things to do, whether it be Excel or SQL or Burst or Power BI or whatever it is that you want us to do. I'd be happy to put something together for you on that. And then out on our website, we are going to be at a number of events coming up with different user groups and so forth. So looking forward to meeting all of you, and thank you for listening in.